So my question is, whose side of the story shall we believe? Because honestly, there are two sides to every story, right? And I just been thinking about this a lot lately. Just how important knowing our actual history is. And I know that going through school, it was probably one of the worst subjects. I hated history. But like I've said in the past, I think that this is done intentionally, where they make certain subjects super, super boring that are really, really important. And I think that's what's happened with us in history. So not only are they feeding us a false history, but they also make it super, super boring. Well, let me clarify that for a minute. I wouldn't doubt that some of these events have actually happened in our history. We're just being told that it's in the wrong time period. So I want to clarify that. And so that's why with us, what we're trying to do, it's kind of hard to match up some of these events and see where does it actually line up in our actual timeline. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately, just the psychology of people and why do people think a certain way? Why do people make certain choices under certain circumstances? And the more I was thinking about this, the more I thought about how easily we as humans can be exploited as well. And I was thinking about this experiment that is well known, and it's actually called the Milgram experiment. This is a good summary that I found, and I'm just going to read this to you guys. It's very interesting just to know the psychology of people and what actually humans can be pushed to do under the pressure of an authority figure. And this is important, and I want to share this with you guys. So in 1963, Stanley Milgram conducted a study on obedience using a series of social psychology experiments. Milgram measured participants' willingness to comply with an authority figure. As you read the text, identify the factors that influence the behavior of the participants in the study. Okay, so let's get started. One of the most famous studies of obedience in psychology was carried out by Stanley Milgram in 1963. So they're literally doing tests to just test our obedience to an authority figure. Now, you don't think that they're interested in this type of information? And what's crazy is just the normal person just doesn't even think that they've actually did tests like this in order to see how far can we push the human mind? How far can we push these people to a breaking point, to the fact where they would violate their own conscience in order to obey an authority figure? This is all very important. Stanley Milgram, a psychologist at Yale University, conducted an experiment focusing on the conflict between obedience to authority and personal conscience. Just like I said, he examined justifications for acts of genocide offered by those accused at the World War II Nuremberg war criminal trials. Their defense was often based on obedience, that they were just following orders from their superiors, which is true. You got the Nuremberg trials where they were tried for crimes against humanity. And in these trials, it basically took all excuses out from these people to where it is not a good enough excuse for you to say, I was just doing my job. Because that was the excuse. I was just following orders, right? I was just listening to what my boss told me to do. And that is not a good enough excuse if you're doing evil to others. We'll continue. The experiments began in July 1961, a year after the trial of Adolf Eichmann in Jerusalem. Milgram devised the experiment to answer the question, could it be that Eichmann and his million accomplices in the Holocaust were just following orders? Could we call them all accomplices? So the fifth point right here, Milgram wanted to investigate whether Germans were particularly obedient to authority figures, as this was a common explanation for Nazi killings in World War II. The aim of this was Milgram was interested in researching how far people would go in obeying an instruction if it involved harming another person. He wanted to know how easily ordinary people could be influenced into committing atrocities. So yeah, this is very interesting because they're using the events that happened in World War II in order to see how far can people actually be pushed, in the real world, if that's really what was going on. And so this was the procedure that happened. Milgram selected participants for his experiment by newspaper advertising for male participants to take part in a study at Yale University. Volunteers were told they would participate in a lab experiment investigating learning. Participants were 40 males aged between 20 and 50, whose jobs ranged from unskilled to professional, from the New Haven area. They were paid $4.50 just for showing up. Okay, so they go in and they just think it's just this random 40 people, and they're trying to be diverse. Okay, you got the professional, you got the unskilled, and we got ages 20 to 50, so it seems like pretty random. But here's the catch. Let's continue. At the beginning of the experiment, they were introduced to another participant who was actually a Confederate of Milgram. These people were actually in on this experiment. Those that were in on it acted like they were random participants, and the random participants had no idea that there were people in the know that were doing these tests on them. So let's continue. They drew straws to determine their roles, learner or teacher, although this was fixed, and the Confederate was always the learner, pretending to be the real participant. There was another Confederate dressed in a gray lab coat and playing the role of experimenter. Okay, so what does that mean? Like, they say it was all fixed, so no matter what, the person who was in the know was always going to be the learner, and the participant was always going to be the teacher. We'll continue. 2 rooms in the Yale Interaction Laboratory were used, one for the learner with an electric chair, and another for the teacher and experimenter with an electric shock generator. The learner was taken into the first room and had electrodes attached to his arm, and the teacher and researcher went into a room next door that contained the electric shock generator. So this is interesting. The person that was in on this experiment, they were in the electric chair, and obviously they weren't getting shocked. It was all an act. But on the other end, you got the participant who's acting as the teacher, and then the experimenter is giving orders to the teacher. And if they get the answer wrong, then they have to shock them. Okay, now listen further. After Mr. Wallace, the learner, had studied a list of word pairs given him to learn, the teacher would then test him by naming a word and asking the learner to recall its partner pair from a list of 4 possible choices. The teacher was then told to administer an electric shock every time the learner makes a mistake, increasing the level of shock each time. There were 30 switches on the shock generator marked from 15 volts, which was a slight shock, to 375 volts, which is a severe shock, and all the way up to 450 volts, which was sure death. So check this out. The learner gave mainly wrong answers on purpose, and for each of these, the teacher gave him an electric shock. When the teacher refused to administer a shock, the experimenter was to give a series of orders called prods to ensure they continued. There were 4 prods, and if one was not obeyed, then the experimenter read out the next prod, and so on. So get this, the learner, who was actually the person who was in on it, is intentionally giving the wrong answers so that the experimenter can command the teacher to give them the shock. I hope you're following. And there were 4 prods. So if the teacher would say, no, I can't shock them, then look, the prod 1 would be please continue, and then they would continue. And then if they didn't, then the next one would be the experiment requires you to continue. So it's more pressure. Oh no. Prod 3, it is absolutely essential that you continue. And then prod 4, you have no other choice but to continue. You've already gone this far, you have to do it. Now get this, this is what's absolutely mind-blowing and fascinating, is the fact that 65% of participants, which were the teachers, continued to the highest level of 450 volts. All of the participants continued to 300 volts. This is interesting, guys. So get this, 65% of the participants would have killed, right here, you see that? Would have killed the learner. And not only that, this is crazy, but the other 35%, so everyone went up to the severe shock. Okay? That is insane. Okay, it was actually 300 volts. So it was a little bit under the severe, but I mean, isn't that just crazy though? The fact that you have this test, and just for the pure sake of peer pressure and an authority figure giving these orders, that 65% of these people would have given a shock to another innocent person that would have been a sure death. And not only that, the rest of them still went up to a very high level of shock. So what is this telling us? It's telling us that we can be very manipulated to go against our own conscience. We have to know how we as people work, how we operate, how does the mind work? This is something that we need to have in our pocket of knowledge. So if we know the fact that we can be manipulated, well, the people that are in charge of everything, I mean, don't you think that they would exploit that because they know? So the enemy is very interested in how our mind works and actually how they can mold us into believing a certain way. And it's not only us believing that way, but for them to manipulate us into thinking that we actually made that choice on our own. And I know that's like a different level of insanity to even think about. Like, even people, like, are your thoughts even your own, or have they been planted in there subconsciously? And I'm going to give an example for this, because there was an old study, Cambridge Analytica. It was previously known as the SCL USA, or they also were called SCL Group, but it was a British political consulting firm that came to prominence through Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal. So this was like before the whole 2016 Trump election and stuff. And so at this time, just consider this. This is very interesting. They used Facebook in order to gather data from us. Okay. So you might have heard this saying before, that if anything is free to use, you are the product. And that's the case here. They used Facebook to gather 5,000 points of data from basically everyone. And that's insane. They learn our tendencies, our likes, our dislikes, our political and religious backgrounds, what we believe politically and religiously. And they were gathering all this information. And what's crazy is they used this to basically, in my opinion, to suck everyone back into the right, left, Democrat, Republican thing. Because before then, people, I believe, might have started actually waking up to the system being corrupt. It's being overrun by these psychopaths. At the time, they were talking about Hillary Clinton and all the scandal going on with that. And then at the same time, you kind of got this Q movement. But they used Facebook to infiltrate even people's thoughts. For example, like, they would come up with a Facebook group, say it was 1776 Patriot. and they would make a group and they would post some things acting like they were one of us, but they really weren't. They were just gathering information, making posts. But people in these groups, they would say like, yeah, Hillary should be locked up, and we're tired of this, we're tired of that. They're gathering our thoughts. What is it that people are thinking? What is it that they actually want? And this makes sense too whenever you think about who actually showed up on the scene right after this. And who was it? It was Donald Trump. Donald Trump inherited this script. It wasn't made for him necessarily, but he inherited the script. He's the ultimate salesman. If you're gonna get anyone to sell something, it's gonna be him. He's the best, I'll admit it. But he's put people under a spell, and I believed it at first. But the thing is what's so deceptive about it is that they use this information against us, put a politician up there that was saying everything that we were thinking. That's why he resonated with us so much at first. They knew what we were thinking because they were collecting our data. The question again, are your thoughts really your own? And one reason why I say that politics doesn't matter, it's all a distraction, because you know one thing that no one will ever talk about is the Federal Reserve, which got established in 1913, which basically is the reason for all our issues today. It's the reason why we have inflation so terrible, the debt is horrible, and why it seems like a lot of things are in chaos. And it's because of the Federal Reserve. We don't have sound money. We can't save for our retirement anymore. It used to be that we knew exactly how much we could have in order to live out the rest of our lives, and we just can't do that anymore because they're constantly inflating our currency. And we got this paper that we say has value, and it doesn't. The only thing that has given it value is that it's backed by the petrodollar, and we buy oil with the dollar. It's the world currency for now. But that's the only thing that gives it any value. And you know what's crazy is that there was a book by John Perkins named The Confession of a Hitman. And I don't have any clue how he was able to get this information out, but it is super fascinating that they used the Federal Reserve and basically collapsing societies economically and then establishing their own Federal Reserve Bank up in those countries.
So, Iraq shows the three stages. The economic hitmen failed there, the jackals failed there, and as a final measure, the military goes in. And in that way, we've really created an empire, but we've done it very, very subtly. It's clandestine. All the empires of the past were built on the military, and everybody knew they were building them. So the British knew they were building them, the French, the Germans, the Romans, the Greeks. And they were proud of it, and they always had some excuse like spreading civilization, spreading some religion, something like that. But they knew they were doing it. We don't. The majority of the people in the United States have no idea that we're living off the benefits of a clandestine empire, that today there's more slavery in the world than ever before. And then you have to ask yourself, well, if it's an empire, then who's the emperor? Obviously, our presidents of the United States are not emperors. An emperor is someone who's not elected, doesn't serve a limited term, and doesn't report to anyone, essentially. So you can't classify our presidents that way. But we do have what I consider to be the equivalent of the emperor, and it's what I call the corporatocracy. The corporatocracy is this group of individuals who run our biggest corporations, and they really act as the emperor of this empire. They control our media, either through direct ownership or advertising. They control most of our politicians because they finance their campaigns, either through their corporations or through personal contributions that come out of the corporations. They're not elected, and they don't serve a limited term, they don't report to anybody. And at the very top of the corporatocracy, you really can't tell whether a person's working for a private corporation or the government because they're always moving back and forth. So, you've got a guy who one moment is the president of a big construction company like Halliburton, and the next moment he's vice president of the United States, or the president who is in the oil business. And this is true whether you've got Democrats or Republicans in the office. You have them moving back and forth through the revolving door. And in a way, Our government is invisible a lot of the time, and its policies are carried out by our corporations on one level or another. And then again, the policies of the government are basically forged by the corporatocracy and then presented to the government. They become government policy. So it's an incredibly cozy relationship. This isn't a conspiracy theory type of thing. These people don't have to get together and plot to do things. They all basically work under one primary assumption, and that is that they must maximize profits regardless of the social and environmental costs.
And what's interesting, and this also goes with the history of things, where there's certain events, guys, where are literally less than 100 years ago, and we have still no clue exactly what happened. Like in World War II, people still debate on what actually happened. And just in light of the Little Season stuff, like, you mean to tell me that people can't even agree on what happened 50 years ago, and you're 100% certain that 200 years ago that it happened this exact way? Or you're 100% certain that it's impossible that Christ already returned, even though there's so much remnants of it? We barely can even grasp 50 years ago, and we can't even agree on what happened then. You know, even 11. There are people that genuinely believe today that people with box cutters hijacked a plane and crashed it into the towers. Like, people actually still believe that story and that lie. And you know what? They're teaching it to this next generation, and of course they're going to believe it too. So how easy is it to indoctrinate people? How easy is it to deceive people? Because we could see it even today and right now. Even the most recent thing that happened to us in 2020.
Chinese health authorities are still working to identify behind a pneumonia outbreak in the central city of Wuhan.
At least 59 people are believed to have been sickened by the new.
Tonight, U.S. airports on high alert, screening passengers for symptoms of a deadly new.
I have today declared that the coronavirus presents a public health emergency in the United States.
19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
We will be suspending all travel from Europe to the United States.
People still can't agree what the truth is on that. And you know what? The main story, the main narrative in 50 years, if we even get that long, is going to be there was a terrible, terrible pandemic, and thank God the government came up with a vaccine and it saved the entire world. Like, that is going to be the story. Do you guys understand that? And that happened within our lifetime. And that's why it is so important for them to get our children into the public indoctrination system. Because you know what? They spend 14,000 hours just sitting in a classroom. So you tell me, they spend that many hours. Are you spending that many or more with your child, mom or dad? Are you teaching your child? Are you just sending them off to get taught by who knows who? Who knows who's teaching your children what? And in order for mom and dad both to go get a job and work, for what? You know, that's the deception there. Because and like I said, all of it kind of makes sense. It all goes back to the Federal Reserve and them inflating our currency. The purpose of women's lib was not for women's rights. You have to understand that. It was to get mom into the workforce and for them to tax 100% of the population, because before then they could only tax half. So at face value, it seemed virtuous. Like, yeah, it's all about women's rights. They can work now. But there was an agenda behind it all. And look at where we at now because of the women's lib. But the main purpose, get mom out of the house and get the children into the schools. Because what was it before? We were actually teaching our children. And we're not anymore. We're not teaching our children. You send them off into public indoctrination and then you complain that they come out an atheist? I mean, give me a break. What do you expect? We're either going to teach our children or we're going to give it to the authority of the state. But even in Aaron Russo's interview, he was talking about that, because Aaron Russo actually made a really good film that I suggest you guys watch as well. It's called Freedom to Fascism, and it exposes all of this with the Federal Reserve, what I'm talking about. And he had an interview because he used to be kind of close with these Rothschild guys, and they were trying to rub shoulders with him, but he didn't agree with them. This is according to his word. But he says that very thing, that women's lib was in order to get mom into the workforce. It wasn't for women's rights.
Well, one of the things they told me was that he was at the house one night, and we were talking, and he started laughing. He said, "Aaron, what do you think women's liberation was about?" And I said, I had pretty conventional thinking about it at that point. I said, I think it's about women having the right to work, getting equal pay with men, just like they won the right to vote, you know? And he started to laugh. He said, "You're an idiot." And I said, "Why am I an idiot?" He said, let me tell you what that was about. We, the Rockefellers, funded that. We funded women's lib, you know? And we're the ones who got all over the newspapers and television, the Rockefeller Foundation. He says, "And you want to know why?" He says, "There were two primary reasons." And they were, one reason was we couldn't tax half the population before women's lib. And the second reason was, now we get the kids in school at an early age. We can indoctrinate the kids how to think. It breaks up the family. The kids start looking at the state as the family, as the school, as the officials, as their family, not as the parents teaching them. And so those are the two primary reasons for women's lib, which I thought up to that point was a noble thing. You know, when I saw their intentions behind it, where they were coming from when they created it, the thought of it, I saw the evil behind what I thought was a noble venture.
And now you got both mom and dad working. And even as a child, you think about this, mom has maternity leave for how long? And then she sends off her baby to be taken care of by some random stranger, and she's paying them to do it. It's insane. And just thinking of it this way, like, how much can our history actually be altered even within 50 years? Because with all these examples that I gave, people still can't come into an agreement on certain events and what actually happened. And it's hard. I get it. It's really hard because we grew up thinking a certain way, and we believed that what we were taught was actually the truth. So when you got people like me or someone else actually saying something that's foreign to your ears, it's uncomfortable a little bit, you know? And I get that. We've all been there. But this is a real thing, guys. It's cognitive dissonance. You don't want to actually believe it because it's contrary to what you previously believed or held to be true. And cognitive dissonance is a real thing, and I don't deny it. And I understand it may be hard to hear some of these things. But my point is, history is important, and we need to look into more of our history. Otherwise, it'll be forgotten forever. And with the public schooling system, I'm going to touch on this too. They are teaching children what to think. They're not teaching them how to think. So that's why when they come out of the public indoctrination centers, they come out as order followers and appeal to authority. Why is it that, this is another thing too, is why is it that if someone has a paper that has their name on it that says that they have this certain title, what makes them more special than you? To me, that's just a certificate that says I'm the most indoctrinated person in this room. And honestly, guys, head knowledge can only get you so far. If you don't have the Spirit of God dwelling in you and guiding and directing you, head knowledge means nothing. Because hath not God made the foolish things of this world to confound the wise? And the wisdom of this world is foolishness unto God. So a lot of times these people think that they're so wise, so smart, and they're fools. I'm sorry, that's what the Bible says. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. We need to just rethink a lot of things. And honestly, I saw this in my most recent video I came out with about what people are saying is Tartaria. Well, no, it's actually Rome because of what the Bible says about the fourth beast and all that. If you guys are interested, go check it out. But this comment, it was saying that life, in a sense, or this journey that we're taking, it's almost like a video game. And I thought this was such a good analogy because you have certain levels in these video games and you got certain challenges and trials that you need to go to in order to, quote, level up, right? So whenever we come to a certain knowledge, it's like we kind of level up in a sense, because the things that used to deceive us will no longer work on us anymore. And that's the point of what I'm trying to get at, is when we know the truth, the spell doesn't work. The magic doesn't work on us. Because even in the Bible, it talks about people who lie in wait to deceive by cunning craftiness, and they have the sleight of hand, like these magicians are like, whoop, nope, over here. That's a sleight of hand. That's what these people are doing. They're messing with our minds. Okay, why do you think Jesus says, be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind? What does it mean for your mind to be renewed? It means you let go of the slop that you've been taught your whole life. You start over. And you know what? It's been real heavy on my wife and I before we had children, that we knew that we wanted to homeschool them, because we went to public school and we knew how it was. And I feel so strongly with just us teaching our children, guys. And that's my exhortation. And has it been easy? No, it's not easy. Some things that are worthwhile aren't easy, and they shouldn't be easy. But what's the reward in the end? The reward is that I keep my children and their minds to be sound. And it's a financial struggle too, because my wife does not work. She stays at home with the children to teach them. And I am doing my best in order to be more present here with them now, which is why I've had this fire to get this information out to you guys. Because I feel like over the past years that I've been learning a lot of things, and I just think now God is telling me that, okay, now you need to tell everyone what you learned about. And so that's what I'm doing right now. But honestly, it's a war. And I know Christians say that all the time. Oh, we're in a spiritual war, but like, do you really believe that? You do? Well, then why do you trust the care of your child in strangers, in the hands of strangers? And I'm not meaning for this, guys. I know that times are hard right now, trust me. And it's been a struggle for us too, honestly. But I know that if I do the right thing and I do as God has called me to do, to raise up my children and to teach them, that ultimately He will provide for us, even being a single income family. And I have that faith that if I train my child up in the way that they should go, when they are old, they shall not depart from it. And I believe that by faith. But if we say that we believe the Bible and that it's a spiritual war, like we say we believe it, well, let's start acting like it then. I appreciate you guys listening. Let me know what you think about in the comments, and we'll catch you in the next one. God bless.